Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Optometry Money Podcast, where I help optometrists all over the country make better and better decisions around your money, your career, and your practice. I am your host, Evon, certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors, a commission-free financial planning firm serving only optometrists nationwide. On today's show, we have another great guest, Dr. Chad Fleming. He's the partner of Wichita Optometry in Wichita, Kansas, and the founder of Optometry CEO. Dr. Fleming has about 20 years experience practicing as an OD and in practice ownership. He's written quite a bit in publications like Review of Optometric Business. It was so much fun talking with him as he talks about his career, his experience buying into and also growing a private practice. And we dive into his views on the changes and future of optometry and the hope and the benefits of private practice. He talks about contract negotiations from both the side of the associate and the owner, what to think about when deciding whether you should shoot for practice ownership or build a career as an associate. Talks about navigating partnerships, when it makes sense for a practice to add on an associate and also a partner, his advice to his younger self, and so much more. So this was definitely a jam-packed episode. Check out the show notes for all the resources mentioned in the show. If you have any questions about anything we talk about today, reach out to Chad or to me at Evon, E-V-O-N, at optometrywealth.com. If you enjoy the conversation, please share with your peers and please leave us an honest review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Any feedback from you is helpful for me to make this show more and more valuable to you and your peers. So, or if you have any topics for the show you'd like covered or questions you'd like answered on the show, reach out to me as well. If you want to know more about how I and Optometry Wealth Advisors help optometrists to get organized with your finances, master your cash flow, tackle taxes more proactively, and overall help you plan around your money and your practice more purposefully, check out my website, optometrywealth.com, and you can schedule a short intro call just to chat with me and talk about what's on your mind and see if I can be a resource for you. So, without further ado, here is my awesome and fun interview with Dr. Chad Fleming. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Optometry Money Podcast. I am your host, Evon Mindrin, and I am back with another awesome guest today, Dr. Chad Fleming. He is the co-owner of Wichita Optometry in Wichita, Kansas, and is the founder of Optometry CEO. Chad, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Evan, and appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and I've been excited to talk with you today. I first came across your name in an article you wrote back in 2016 for a Review of Optometric Business, and the article was titled, Practice Ownership. Is it as good as you thought it would be? And I clearly held on to it for a while, and I loved it because you so clearly and honestly talked about the trade-offs of practice ownership and the lessons you learned from having gone through that yourself. And that's such a big decision for anybody that wants to start a business, because it affects almost every aspect of your life if you do go that direction. And it's easy to look at only the positives. It's easy to look at those industry benchmark surveys that talk about, practice owners on average earn more than associates, and then think, that's what I want. Like, I want that good stuff. I want more money. But as you put it, those things come with time and they come with a cost. And just like every decision in life, there's trade-offs and pros and cons, benefits and drawbacks. And I'm not an optometrist. I'm a financial advisor that works with optometrists, and I see the results of these decisions from the financial aspects, and I can see how they weigh on the optometrist as a person in terms of stress and anxiety and concern, and also joy and excitement, and sometimes all those things all mixed together in one conversation. So I'm excited to get your, with this long-winded intro, I'm excited to get your perspective in your career as an optometrist, having been in this for almost 20 years now, I think, and in your perspective and in your insights and thoughts around what should ODs be thinking about and weighing as they're coming to this important decision of whether to own or not, or maybe currently practice owners that are wondering, what have I done, and are wondering if they made the right decision. So with that, I'm excited to dig in.
Well, that makes two of us, Evan, because we're talking about one of my favorite things in optometry, and that's the business aspect of it. I really enjoy. I'm a trained optometrist, but more of a businessman in my thinking and the way I approach not only optometry but life. And I think that optometry has more than given us opportunities to fulfill helping people, but also to take care of our finances and take care of the things that we need to make the world go round. So, yeah, I've been excited for the interview, Evan. I think this is a great opportunity, hopefully to encourage and give hope to those individuals out there that thinking, this game is over, because there's a lot of the headlines in our industry that make you think that the game of being in private practice and that aspect is, quickly coming to a halt. And I would respectfully disagree with that. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today and excited to explore opportunities and share what I've learned, hopefully through my failures, and help people avoid some of the pitfalls.
Awesome. Well, let's start with, how did you get into optometry? Why did you choose optometry as your career and your profession?
I'm a family first guy, and I like what it afforded me as a family. I had kind of a strange thing, but I probably could have went and played professional golf at a level, maybe not PGA, but some of the smaller tours as I was growing up and getting involved in that. I was also interested in getting into the business world, and I chose optometry because of the lifestyle that it could afford me and the flexibility it could afford me with family life. I want to make sure I was there for my spouse and for my kids. And so I've wanted to be an optometrist since I was in sixth grade, but that was more of just wanting to be in healthcare and work with the eyes.
Interesting. And you graduated in 2002, is that right?
I did, from Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. And so where did your career go from graduation?
Well, I won't bore people too much with that. I knew what I wanted. I wanted to own a practice. I wanted to grow into ownership of a practice. I did not want to start a practice. I think from the financial side and also from the growth, there's a lot less headaches if you can correctly buy into a practice and transition that way versus an upstart. So I knew what I was looking for. I went into the negotiating game with the owners and said, 1 year, I'll come on as an associate. And then after that, we'll either part ways or I would like to be offered an ownership position. So we lined that out ahead of time. It was risky because there's some they're not going to offer that to you. And the group that I found, they were hungry for somebody to come and buy in. And obviously 20 years ago, it's a little bit different setting than it is today in regards to how you're getting in as a shareholder and owner of the company.
And how has the practice changed over those 20 years since you've been there? What have you seen change either in your own practice or just in optometry as a whole?
Man, that is a broad question. Um, Optometry as a whole it's consolidating. I think that's something that we saw less of 20 years ago. I think we had some consolidation, but I think over the last, especially 5 years, there's been a lot of consolidation, whether it's selling practices to PE or guys like me out there with the other owners looking to purchase smaller practices to grow in that manner. So from that aspect of the business side, it's grown that way, and it's a team approach now, where it used to be a lot of single owners, and right now the single owners are just trying to get out or trying to get somebody to come in and buy them out, and that's just, I think that's a tougher road than finding a team of owners together and running it more like a company that we would see outside of it, running like a company. And so you got a board and you've got your leaders on the board and moving in that direction. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm seeing the network of guys and gals that I interact with are doing, is taking these younger doctors and giving them positions in. It's very difficult for them to come out of school, have a $300,000 loan, and then buy into a practice for 500 million, 1.5, whatever it is. So we're chunking out percentages of ownership so that we can get them into the decision making, and then through the organizational chart and through the executive level can teach them the leadership skills that are necessary. for them to continue to be successful.
Interesting. So you're seeing the future being having consolidation, not in terms of private equity and corporate optometry picking up practices, but in terms of doctors banding together, independent doctors banding together, and functioning more like using the tools that you might find somewhere like a corporate business to improve their own private business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that having been at the table with private equity 3 different times for just various reasons, it's a great time to own a practice. I mean, it's crazy because the fear is you read a Vision Monday, or you go to one of our events, Vision Expo, and every topic's about private equity, and it's these private equity companies putting money in there to create a environment or a culture that says, hey, if you're not bought by us, it's going to be really hard. And what we're finding on the private side is it's actually creating a growth environment for us, in the sense of those who aren't selling are growing. Where's that growth coming from? I'm not going to speculate on that. I mean, I can speculate, but on this podcast, I don't think that's the direction that we're looking for.
Yeah.
But there is growth. And owning an optometry practice, you're a financial guy. One of the best things you can do as your finances grow is be diversified.
Yep.
So if I've got diversification into real estate, I've got diversification into equities in my office, then that's really multiple areas of diversity that you have, because really your ownership in your office is a risky stock. And so if you play everything out, you need to stay diversified in that, because if you sell out to PE, well, where are you going to take and put that money? You're going to stick it in real estate? You're going to stick it in equity? You actually shrink down your diversification.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, and I'm glad to hear from you that there's hope, because I don't think you have to go far to find or at least hear reasons why you shouldn't own private practice, whether it's managed care reimbursements or private equity or whatever the perceived risks or whatever it may be. I don't think you have to go far to hear those reasons. So it's good to hear from you, Hope. I just had a conversation with Eric Matei of Acrinos, a private practice consultant, and he went into detail, a huge monologue about why the future of private practice optometry is so positive. So go back for the listener, go back a couple episodes to listen to that. He talks a lot about that. But let's go back to your beginning, because there's so much that I want to pull out of that. You graduated in 2002, became partner in 2003. So we have 1 year, and right away you're negotiating your associate contract. Let me start with this. What made you so sure and certain that you wanted to own instead of just being an employed associate? And what are some things that the listener should think about and weigh as they're going through that decision of, should I own, whether it's cold start or buying in, or should I just go the route of being an associate?
As an optometrist, you want to have input into what's the decision making. So you want to go into a group, you want to be a part of the decision-making process of the group, because what you'll find out is once the newness wears off and you walk into a group and they tell you, okay, we're going to switch EHRs. Okay, now you're going to start using this particular, we got rid of this contact lens company. We're not going to use them anymore. We're going to use this contact lens company, this ophthalmic lens company. We're going to go to something different. It's these decisions that impact your clinic that, number one, it's nice to be a part of that decision-making process. And number two, from a business aspect, you're getting compensated for the work that you're doing, but it's also nice to be investing long-term into something that is creating equity into your portfolio as a whole. So as a doctor, if you can own and you can work in practice, you're getting a dual investment in helping you pay off those student loans a lot quicker, because then the value of your education goes up significantly, because we are unique in the sense that you don't have to have an MBA. You don't have to invest all that time and energy into becoming a business person. You just have to do it hard knocks. Or you can come in and be a smaller partner. Maybe you don't want to run the business, but we have we have multiple partners because we're bringing in the next generation to own smaller percentages of the larger entity. But we're also teaching them how to lead, because the next generation needs to learn how to lead, because I still firmly believe best patient care is when a doctor who's the owner is making a decision on what we're going to do, that we're going to do best for patient first, profit second. You can't go profit first, patient second. Nobody says that, but you watch people's behaviors. Behaviors will tell you what your priorities are.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so it sounds like one of the best reasons to own, and maybe the best reason to own, is that you do have that control and creative freedom over how the business is run and managed, and around the patient experience and everything you'd want to do in that practice. What are some of the drawbacks then that these ODs need to keep in mind when they're looking at that?
I'm going to back up one. I think I missed a key point, Evan, on the ownership, because it's the same reason that I chose not to sell to PE, but instead to move forward. And a big thing that kept coming to me was autonomy and freedom. And I think when you own a practice and you're setting your schedule and you have that autonomy, that's an amazing, you can't put a price tag on that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important, because we do talk about finances, and I know that that's an area that you're helping a lot of us out in. But the autonomy and the life that you get in that, of nobody tells me that I've got to see a patient on a Sunday.
Yeah.
I have nobody that tells me that I have to do that. So sorry, go ahead and ask the question. I think you said, what are the negatives, or what
are the drawbacks to keep in mind? Those are some of the positive. What are some of the other things to weigh in that decision?
The risk, the emotional spend that you deal with day in and day out when you have to make decisions. So one of the things, as people look at the environment now and they say, things are just not good for private practice. When you've been in it for 20 years and you've seen all the curveballs that have been thrown at you, you just have to learn to hit the curveball. I mean, we do that in all different stuff, but I use that in baseball. Is if you go up against a different pitcher and they've got a different type of curveball, you don't just walk away from it. You're like, okay, how do we hit this guy? It's the same thing in optometry. And one of the negatives is you've got to learn how to ebb and flow and change and lead change. So you have to be you got to be able to embrace change and to lead people through change. So your leadership has to step up, but that can also be a negative, because it can create a lot of emotional stress. You can't just walk away from it, drop the keys at the door and say, hey, I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Interesting. And, one of the lines that you had written about in your article was that there is freedom that comes with being an associate, which I thought was interesting, because you don't always hear about freedom being associated with being employed. You hear about the freedom of owning a business and everything we just talked about, but there is freedom in being an associate as well. This is something I actually wrote about after reading that, in that no matter which direction you go, practice ownership or being an associate, there's freedom down both roads in that. As an associate, you do get to walk away from the clinic, enjoy your evening, enjoy your family, and just be present and not have to think about all that other stuff that comes with business ownership, and not have to take home all those other administrative duties. And, you're not rocking your son to sleep thinking about, are you pricing your frames correctly or different things like that, so there's a lot of freedom that comes with being an associate, and you just have to sort of think about which freedoms and which drawbacks are you looking for in your life, and do you feel most comfortable with? Anything to add there, Chad?
I think one of the things that is happening in our industry as practices are growing, and as you are getting further developed as an owner in a clinic, OD, taking and delegating and not trying to do it all. That's where I see a lot of the people are getting to, is they're burning out because they're trying to do everything instead of working on the practice. Like they're working in the practice, then they're trying to work on the practice in the evenings and the weekends. And instead of taking the risk to maybe add another associate, add in 2 associates so you can work on the business, now it's consuming your life instead of it being something that you're enjoying having because your investment, your time, your energies, your systems and processes are now paying for themselves because you've got a successful business. Because in optometry, the reason PE wants to buy optometrists is because you look at practices and you can't get the return on investment anywhere in the market like you can in a healthy practice.
Interesting. Yeah, and I want to circle back to that because I think that's a great point we can touch on more. Let's talk again about your first year as an associate, negotiating your contract. And I would assume that contract negotiations aren't something that's taught a whole lot in optometry school. And here you are negotiating a potential buy into your practice, your first job out of school, and then following through as a partner later on. What was it like to negotiate that contract? What are some things that you were thinking about? If you can remember, that far back, what are some things you were thinking about?
Oh, thanks, Evan.
And hey, 20 years, I'm forgetting what I did last month.
Oh, that's good.
If you can think back to what did you keep in mind as an associate negotiating that, and just sort of more broadly, like what should associates who are weighing contract offers, what should they be thinking about as they're weighing that and maybe negotiating that?
They need to be self-aware. They need to know who they are, because what I see now that I'm on the flip side and I deal with all of our associate negotiations and hiring of doctors and bringing doctors through on rotation as a extern, I see doctors not knowing what they want, and so therefore they can't go and get what they want. And so I think the advantage that I had is that I knew what I wanted. I had outlined what I wanted. I knew what my journey, my direction was going. I knew the destination. That makes things extremely clear then what's a yes and what's a no. And what I see a lot of times is students walking out just grateful to get a job. And I think that they're not expecting enough of themselves. While you're in school, I was working during school to know what I wanted and to be able to define that and know that as I was looking around in my third year and in my fourth year at different opportunities, I knew the questions asked because I knew what I wanted out of I knew what I wanted out of it. And I wasn't afraid to risk upfront compensation for long-term gains. And I think that's where a lot of students come out. They see a big debt ticket and they just look at dollars and cents. And what that does is that, with all due respect to them, that's short-term thinking. Because you do need to make some cash, but you also need to be thinking beyond this, where do I want to be? Because I have mentored and led numerous doctors that have gotten out, and about 3 years into it, they're like, I can't keep doing this because it's not what I wanted to do. It's not what I envisioned doing. Is this really what optometry is? And respectfully, it's, well, you went to the highest payer and they just did what they needed to do to get that out of you. And they're going to, rotate to the next person. So I think to answer your question in summary, is being self-aware, knowing who you are. So I needed to know where I could operate in, and then what I wanted long-term in that.
Yeah. And I think a big emotional financial stuff, weights like student loans, big student loan numbers, debt in general, but just things that are weighty financially, have a way of shrinking your time horizon, of just like shrinking your thinking. Like I am only focused on what's right in front of me and sort of ignoring really what I want long-term and what long-term returns or long-term consequences could be. We see that in career decisions, like you just mentioned. We see that in investing in general, looking at your investments. So I think that's a great tip, is just sort of think about who you are and really try to focus on long-term. Like, where do you see your career going long-term? And when you think about that now from the other side of the table as a practice owner, as a partner, how do you like to see those conversations go with your associates? Like, how, for practice owners that are listening to this, like what should they expect as they're having these conversations with their associates? What should they like to see from their associates having these?
Initiative. I think that a potential associate coming in, what is their initiative? What are their questions? Their questions will tell you a lot about who they want to be.
Mm.
I'm looking for somebody, and very openly looking for future owners. We need to put at our table more of the next generation. And so we're looking for ODs. I'm actively looking for ODs who are, we've got a place for associates. So we've got 5 locations and 9 doctors. And so there's a place for associates and a place for those who don't want to own. But I have that conversation with everyone who considers working for us when I interview them is, what is your long-term plans?
Hmm.
And if they can iron that out and they can say it in a way that's clear, that immediately strikes a chord with me, that it's like, okay, this person, number one, is an initiator because they're taking the time to think this process out besides just 1 year. Hey, am I going to get busy or not going to get busy? What I do know is you're going to be busy. You're going to be successful. We need to think past that to match to see if you're a good fit. And so I think that practice owners looking for associates need to do it sooner than they think they do, because I think they settle for just who's ever out there when they put an application out. And I think there's a lot of value out there. I think there's a lot of associates and graduates who are looking to be part of an ownership team. I don't think that dream's dead. I think there's still a lot of hope in that. And I can tell you, just from a compensation standpoint, the long-term play on that, you're going to be financially better off, because I know what you look at the differences of what PE's paying on a percentage of revenue. You look at what private practice is paying on a percentage of revenue. You look what a straight salary is paying. And in the long run, if we're just talking finances, you're going to be financially better off. And you're going to own something that has value, that you can sell at hopefully a greater share price down the road.
So let's talk about partnerships then, and bringing on that associate. You joined a partnership earlier on in your career. This seems to me one of the more difficult business decisions to navigate, is whether to bring on a partner or whether to be a partner. You're juggling different personalities, whether you have shared values, where you're at in your careers, senses of urgency around different things. So there's a lot to sort of think through in that decision. I know some business owners who they'll never take on a partner because they don't want to deal with any of those dynamics or tough decisions, or they just don't want to deal with it. They want a simpler business. So what did you think about as an associate at the time in weighing whether it made sense to get into that partnership? How did you examine your potential partners, and what did you think about when you were making that decision?
Character never changes. The environments will change, the situation will change, but character will never change. So who are these people outside of the practice? How are they in society? How are they at their churches? How are they at the events that they do on the weekends? How is their reputation amongst the schools? How have they treated previous relationships? So do they tend to be one who is successful with spouses? Do they tend to have gone through multiple spouses and that's just never seems to be the right one? Just different patterns, right or wrong. It's patterns outside of the office that I look for in character. And then within the office, talking to the staff. An associate should interview the staff, should ask for permission to say, hey, can I talk about how does the office handle these situations? Somebody comes in, hates their glasses or hates their experience. Are they looking for the short-term sale or the short-term glaucoma workup without long-term follow? How are people treated? Is it an investment, loyalty that they're looking for? And then how are they led? I think the leadership of a group tells you a lot. Are they organized leadership, or are they just going day by day to figure out, just try and put the fires out? I think you can figure out very quickly the quality of partners. Number two, you can never know. Evan, you and I could go into partnership, and there's things about me that you could learn later on, or vice versa, that you just don't know. And so you have to be open to the fact of, how do we undo this if it doesn't work? Let's be real in this. And because when you partner up, I mean, you're dealing with a lot with relationships and learning how to get along with people. So identify roles, scaling up by Vern Harnish, I think it is, or Harnish. Oh my gosh, one of the best books that talks about the need for accountability, how you scale up, who's responsible for what. Clear communication from the top down is hugely important. Organizational chart. Do they have an organizational chart? If they don't have an organizational chart, then they don't know who's doing what. And by that means they basically are, nobody's taking responsibility for anything. So that's a red flag to me. Do they have identified positions in who's the CEO, who's CFO, or who's, various things who are making the final decisions? I don't know how much you want to dig into that. Those are kind of the things I'm looking for, or that I would counsel your listeners to say, these are things you need to pay attention to. It doesn't mean a hard no. It just means if you've got 3 opportunities, you know what you're getting into. Because when you can trust them, then when they tell you that they're going to sell shares or shares are going to be available, you can trust that. Too many times I've seen too many students, I've seen too many doctors who got in bad situations that are then interviewing with us, and they're basically saying it's not what they promised me to be and promised me it would be. And so the people tell you a lot. How's the practice grown? Is it growing? How are they going to how are they going to grow your practice? One of the things we're very clear about associates coming in is we're going to grow your practice this way. And we've got a flip role. Now it's a problem because we've grown a number of associates coming in. I'm going back around and saying, okay, what are you doing to invest in the growth of the practice? Because we brought you up to full time. And it's kind of like the kids who live under wealth. They don't know what it was like to have to mow their own lawn or to not have pop when they go out to eat or whatever it is. I mean, just, they don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. How would you coach an associate that's buying into a practice about how to become a practice owner? What is that transition like? What are some of the duties and just the ways of thinking that they need to adjust or change or to prepare for as their roles change from just an associate employee to a true practice owner?
They need to be willing to do what needs to be done to get the job done. So here's an illustration of myself that my staff laughed at. And it's kind of been our joke around here because we've had, as everybody knows, staffing's been difficult. And so we're having a shortage on staff in our doctor's assistant and scribe areas. And so we're having to adjust with that. And I have some times where I'm available to scribe and I could come in to scribe. And it was a great example at our last staff meeting because I genuinely told them, I said, that's not my job description. It'd be very easy as a doctor to say, hey, that's above me. But we want people coming in who are team players. So people who come in and they want to, most important is to help the patients. And if that means that you have to play optician for 3 weeks because we're in a pinch, you do that. You do that in your time. I think that when you come in as an associate, too many times there's a sense of entitlement. Okay, now I'm an associate. Now I'm going to get paid. Instead of most opportunities come about because you gave things away. That's one of the things that I've learned over time that I never realized, but the things that I gave away is what's created opportunities for me now in my career. So early in my career, giving away time, giving away volunteer, giving away various things has paid itself back tenfold in whether it's the patients that I impacted and the growth that we had in that, whether it's I'm in a bad situation with my family and now I've got a partner that just comes in and says, hey, I got it for you. You go take care of your family. There's just a give and take on that. So my advice for young associates coming in is, what can I do to be a part of the leadership team? What's the leadership structure? And just taking on responsibilities and owning those responsibilities.
Yeah, interesting. As the owner, you do for the most part want to steer your time and activities towards the things that are most highest value and that bring you energy. But yeah, as the leader and the owner now, the owner of the business, you do need to get in there into the trenches when the time comes for that. And and to pick up whatever the business needs to run day to day and to operate, to be able to get there and get your hands dirty and to do all those little things. In terms of timing, when does it make sense for a practice to bring on a partner?
That is a question that I wish sooner than you think. And the reason is because it's the old adage of you'll only grow to 80% of what your capacity is. And so what I've seen over time in adding associates, our first associate was the hardest one to add. I had two partners at the time, older than me. One, definitely is already retired and moved on, but it was this resistance to bringing in an associate because we weren't busy enough. We were all booked out at least 2 weeks in advance, but we weren't busy enough to truly keep that person full. And finally, through a lot of negotiation, a lot of back and forth, I took on more risk because I really believed that, hey, we need to start investing in associates. That associate became busier quicker. Now that we had key times available, it's like, where did all this growth come from? We add associates to stimulate growth. So yes, it does cost you up front, but I see too many practices where the senior doctor will bring in a doctor, not give them any patients. Every time we brought in a doctor, especially lately, I've passed patients on. Been like, you know what? I've gone down to now just glaucoma and dry eye, and I've taken a lot of my patients and I've moved them on to the next generation. So what does that do? That opens up for me to get referrals. The doctors who've been there the most are going to fill up the fastest. So transitioning patients on to that new doctor and bringing in a new doctor sooner than later. I see the biggest mistake is doctors bring in a new OD or an associate OD and say, well, go and get patients. What that does is that burns the OD out, frustrates the OD, and then they don't grow near as fast. And then the doctor wonders why it's costing them so much to have that new OD there. And the first year is going to cost, but after that, I know I make it sound simple, but it's a risk. It's a risk tolerance. And many people are don't like the risk that's involved because it's going to take a pay cut. It takes a pay cut on my front side, but on the back side, there's just many things beyond just compensation. There's freedom that comes in too. There's acute cares that are taken care of. There's just so many things that it creates margin in your life to bring another OD in. So there's some financial benefits, but there's also some life balance benefits. You get part of your life back too.
Yeah, with more money, you can then buy more time. And one of the hardest things I think for that I've heard for any professional business owner to sort of realize is that sometimes you are the bottleneck. And
yes,
by keeping too much on your shoulders, you're actually holding back the business from growth. And bringing in good team members that can then take on some of those responsibilities and free up your time to then do things that are more impactful that are either more impactful to the practice or frankly just more impactful for your life and frees up some of your time to spend more time with your family or whatever else you'd like to do with your time. Sometimes you're the bottleneck, and that's hard to it's a hard pill to swallow, I think. But that's the hard truth.
I think there's a sense too, when you get in clinic for a while, your patients become your identity and being busy becomes your identity, and you're unwilling to give that up because you've given too much credence to that defining you. And that doesn't define an individual by how busy they are. So if I'm not busy, that doesn't define me because I've passed those patients on to other associate doctors. And I've seen that as we've purchased practices, I've worked with doctors. There's a sense of they don't want to let the patient go because the patient needs them. Well, that's when a self-awareness would say, no, you need the patient to fulfill your identity cues to make you feel good about yourself. And that sounds harsh, and that's not what my intention is. But sometimes when we realize that, it helps us to move to a better place. Because the other things I know is those doctors are strapped. They feel like they don't have a life. But they've created their life to be that clinic time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, and just thinking about identity, like something that it's clear that you caught early is that you're not just a practitioner anymore. You are a practitioner on one hand, but also the business owner on the other. And if you're not giving the business owner identity enough time and only latching onto that practitioner role, if you're not I don't know quite where I'm going with this, but if you're not realizing that you are also a shareholder or you're also a practice owner and you need to focus on those duties as a practice owner and not so much as only the practitioner, then you can start to make better decisions in your business. And like I mentioned, like relieve the business of the bottleneck, which unfortunately sometimes is you. I don't know. Any thoughts around that different identity or different hats you're wearing as the business owner and separately as a practitioner?
Well, I think the easy illustration is a coach and a player. That's why
Yes.
you watch football games and you have an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, a head coach. They're seeing things from various aspects of this. And when you're the player on the field trying to also coach the team, you're missing so much of what's going on. And so you limit the capacity of your team to be successful. And what I realized when I pulled myself back to become a coach primarily, there's so many things to identify to grow. Immediately, when you start working as a coach instead of a player coach, your margins tend to go up. The profitability of the practice tends to go up because you're focusing on leading the team. You're focusing on the right things. You're focusing on the areas to really stimulate the growth and, most important, patient care. You're dealing with things that are giving patients a better experience. When patients have a better engagement with your practice, the practice is going to grow. And so you've got to have coaches. That's why they all sit up high in the boxes and overlook what's going on the field. And then they share with their players on the iPad or the Surface of, hey, this is what's going on. You can't see this from this direction. And that's what's happening in so many optometry practices. You can't see what's going on in that area. Like the optical, people, practice owners will just ignore the optical. I've heard that, hey, there's no profits left in the optical. And so they just kind of let it roll. They put somebody in the optical, one of the opticians, to just run things. I'm telling you, there's still profits in the optical. It's not like it was 20 years ago, but when you learn to hit the curveballs, it's amazing what can still be profitable and still be competitive in today's market.
That was way better than everything I said. So thanks for pulling me out of the water there. Appreciate that. So you talked about adding an associate and increasing capacity in the practice for that next stage of growth. But it's one thing to add an associate, but it's another thing to then bring on that associate as a partner, as an owner in the practice. When is it the right time to want to bring on that associate as an actual partner in the practice? Or what should you see
when you have the right person? That's a great question, Evan. I think, though, there's not a formula for that because you're investing in people. I'm investing in people. And so I'm not looking for a formula to fit. We will create a position if we have the right person, because that's what you're looking for. And that's what you're trying to find, is that knowing what you're looking for, knowing the character qualities will keep you from making decisions that are hurried, not thought out. Well, you're a financial guy. A lot of investing is fear or greed. So it's driven by emotion. That's how you make bad investments. And so if it's in fear or it's in greed, you're hiring an associate or you're taking your associate to ownership. That's a problem. So I think we have a good definition of what we want in an owner, so that when we find that, it's time to bring them in. We like to offer them a smaller percentage of ownership. So number one, they can feel like they're buying in. Number two, it's an engagement period. To a sense, it's a lot easier to undo a 5% shareholder versus a 40% shareholder in that. And so we like to bring them in to sit them at the table and then watch them grow, because they will never be what you expect them to be. But that's why you're the leader, and that's why you're mentoring them and you're teaching them. You've got to have a heart of a teacher. You've got to have a heart of a mentor in order to raise your team. So you're captain of the team. You got to go out there. You got to lead them. These new doctors, these associates, they're scared. I don't care what bravado they show you on the outside. They're scared because they don't know. and
Yeah.
they're lost, and they're trying to talk to Evon about, hey, how do I do this? They're trying to get all this anecdotal evidence or I would say not anecdotal, in theory,
Yeah.
and then they're trying to play it out instead of just growing within the system.
Yeah.
And I know there's opportunities out there because just in the network of practice owners that I run with, my small network of own 3 practices, 7 practices, 10 practices. We own 5 practices. Man, we're constantly looking for that right OD who's going to potentially be a partner.
Interesting. For you, it's about finding that right person. What does that right person look like? What are some of the characteristics? And I guess this works for the associates too. What should the associate be thinking about in terms of bringing to the table? You know, what should they be bringing to the table for practice ownership?
Well, I think the question's a good question. I do. I think my answer for the listeners needs to be discerned, because my answer is definitely going to be different than another owner's answer in that, because what I feel is a fit, and we see this, I use the sports analogy, but you look at a draft and different teams are drafting different positions for various reasons. For me, I'm looking for who the person is. That's going to be long term, and we've been talking about this. So it's a character. If I can get them in working there ahead of time, I love that we have students that go through our door on rotation, because then I get to see and experience students working in the office. They don't know it, but that's part of their interview. We're finding people at that we're identifying with. What are they involved in outside of optometry? One of the things that we look for is, are they involved in family? Are they involved in their church? If so, how are they involved in those areas? What traumas, what difficulties have they gone through in life? And how do they respond to that? Because optometry, whether you own or you're an associate, you're going to have trauma. You're going to have difficulties. There's going to be cases that don't go your way. You're not going to sleep at night. You're going to be traumatized by who knows how somebody treats you, or just living in the world in general. How are you going to respond to that? So we try and bring some of those things out, but it's really difficult in just an interview process. I think it needs to be your talking in relationship with these ODs. And so getting those types of opportunities is what's difficult. I will say that social media, great thing for communication, great thing for keeping up, also very revealing about people.
Yep.
And about who they are. And so I think that you do have to be careful. So you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, whatever it is, and you're commenting, you're responding to various, whether it's politics or whether it's, I don't know what it is, or whether it's optometry and you don't like something in optometry. Believe it or not, the way you're responding, people are looking at that because it says the position that you stand. It says a lot about not who you are on the where you're trying to play and trying to be. It says about your heart, because we know that you can't hide somebody's heart. It's very hard over time to hide a heart. And so I would say that we're looking at people's trying to get what's the core of their heart, what's their motives. They're going to be rewarded coming into our practice if they're not a self-seeking individual. It's a dynamic that when you are trying to grab and get all the time, you're actually going to lose. When you're giving and you have a heart of giving and you're willing to come in and give, it's amazing how much you get in return. And when we have somebody who's a doctor that understands that, that makes for a great partner, because then we're going to be successful. And then what they tried to grab is going to be 5 times bigger, because they just gave to the team and to being a team player.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that myself in both the professional circles I'm in optometry, just seeing the way optometrists are giving insights and information and wisdom to one another, and the way that other professionals in my profession have been able to give help and insights to one another, and how it may seem counterintuitive because, some people may think, well, that's competition and I need to keep things in for myself. But But ultimately that will come back to help you. And one last thing I wanted to ask you about partnerships was, I'm a financial guy, right? So I want to come back to the numbers a little bit. When does it make sense, or what should both the current owner, and potential partner, associate look at and think about in terms of whether it makes sense financially to buy in or bring on a partner into that practice?
I'll start with buying in. So I've, over the course of my experiences, have had the opportunity to look at a lot of P&Ls on some previous work that I've done, and you getting the right professional advice to look at a P&L, because P&Ls can be very misleading on how successful a practice is. And you want to look at practices, are they making money? New way of thinking, not the old school. One of the things optometry messed up a long time ago, and with all due respect to our consultants, but when they started saying what's the net of an optometry practice, and they didn't pull out the income that the doctors get, that is one of the biggest mistakes that we made as a profession, because you can't analyze a business correctly when you do that. So make sure they pull out a reasonable salary. Make sure you see where everything's spent so you can see where the profits are. You want to respect what they're telling you, but most people are unwilling to be transparent, or they're unaware of what transparency looks like, because they're making 150K and they think they're doing great because they have provided themselves a great income. And then you go in and you say, well, what are the profits? I don't make a whole lot much more. There's not a whole lot more than that. And you're just like, wait a second. This is basically a hobby, because there's no profits in this business. So understanding how the profits in the business work is extremely important. So if you see a practice, they've paid out all the doctors, they've paid everything out, and then in the bucket, they put in the profits, and you see that those profits are north of 10%, then you can start saying, okay, this practice looks like it is a healthy practice. Because there's a lot of healthy practices out there, and there's a lot of practices out there that are existing, and the doctor's talking a lot of bravado, but when you get down into the numbers, it is not successful. And so they can't afford you. And so when you see that, that's going to make it really clear to you of which practice you're most likely going to thrive at and which practice you're going to struggle with, because that doctor is going to get nervous a lot faster because there's no margin in that. So one of the things I did with that, Evan, that's just because it probably is not podcast material, but I'm going to bring it up because it's financial. I took what we did in optometry. I got so frustrated with our old model. I went outside of optometry and networked for references and consults with financial advisors, and put together a 3-column way of how an optometry practice should be run from the top down. And one column is clinical pay. So the doctors get paid a certain percentage of revenue. The next is executive pay. So we're getting bigger. Yeah. The people who are leading the practice, what should the CEO, CFO should get paid 10-15% of what's left over after paying the doctors. And then you have your profit section. And this model has been replayed in multiple other practices, and it's been very successful in outlining, so you can quickly take a snap at, you could, Evan, and like Evan's a great resource. So Evan could look at stuff, and being a financial guy, he could look at that immediately and say, that's a healthy practice. Look at how much is going in the profits. Everybody's been paid. That one's good. This one that looks just the same down the street, same size, same excitement, everybody's at the ball game at night, has no money going in the profit section. Right there is your answer as buying in. You can tell how healthy. On the flip side, Evan, when you're looking to bring somebody in, you need to be able to prove those numbers. You need to be able to not just say it to them. You need to be able to go and sit down and say, this is why we're valuable, outside of how you value our company. So it's very misleading if a company is valued. Now, if it's done on EBITDA, I could argue with that's definitely better, but that's not an accepted norm. That's something PE came in with. But the accepted norm in today's day and age is still being slanted towards the old way of doing things. And that's a percentage of revenue. And when you do a percentage of revenue, that can be highly misleading in how successful a practice is. So I give a lot of different things there. And I know that, 100 balls are going in your mind because you're a finance guy. But I'll pause and see where you're at and what you want to say.
Yeah, any resources you have on anything you just said, send over to me and I'll get them in the show notes. But I've never understood why common practice in optometry is to have owner's profit and owner's pay as compensation for practicing considered in the net. Like you've got 30% net, and part of that is actual profit of the business, and part of that's compensation for practitioner work, because your work as a practitioner, if you're a single doc or if you've got other doctors, that is a real cost to the practice. You have to have someone doing that job, whether it's you as the owner doing it or some other associate doing it. That is a real cost to the practice. So if you were to look at your net and subtract out what you would have to reasonably pay another doctor to do that job, that is the actual health of your and profitability of your business. Yep. And you have to, again, we talked about wearing two different hats: the practitioner hat as the employee, and the owner's hat. You as an employee need to demand your wage. You've got to be paid reasonable salary for your work for a lot of reasons. And then you have to separate yourself out and look at it as a shareholder and say, okay, let's pretend I hired someone else. How do I evaluate the health of my business as a pure shareholder? And it's so confusing. I just don't understand why that's conventional, is to include that all in the net. So that's probably a whole nother hour episode of a podcast. Maybe I'll twist your arm and convince you to come back on. But I think you gave us a lot to chew on and think about there, both from the side of the associate maybe buying in, and also the owner thinking about adding on a partner. As we sort of wrap up our time here, if you were to go back and talk to yourself back in 2002 or 2003, what advice would you give to yourself to either help you to get into a better position as an associate, or just to help you prepare to be a practice owner and to build a better practice for yourself and your employees and your patients and community?
Best advice I'd give to myself is be patient. All good things develop with time. And I think there was times that I got impatient as far as where my destination was and what I was going for. And I wanted to speed the process up. And in doing that, I had wrecks along the way that knocked me off course. And so I think that that's the biggest thing, is being patient and realizing that there is a good sense of you jumping around. If you haven't found the right place, you want to find the right place, but the grass is the same color no matter where you go. And so you got to figure out where you're going to invest your time, your energy, to get to that destination you're looking to get to, because that's where your opportunities are going to arise. And you're going to be there. And it may be that you go into a partnership and you got to wait for a senior doctor to exit. That might be it. Life's a lot longer than what you think it is. And then just getting good advice, transparent advice, not just advice, but transparent advice. When people read the people being real, the difficulties, don't be captured by the dream or by the bigger story or all the things that are going right. I mean, it's the adage of most people that go on social media get depressed because everybody shares all their good insights. And so you feel like your life is really not that great. And a lot of us struggle. And from the heart, you need to realize that in practice, a lot of us struggle. It would be hubris of me to get on here with Evan and explain this to you and not tell you that it's difficult, it's hard, and everything's not perfect. And so I'm committed to fighting. And I think that's it. So being patient and just being committed to hit the curveball, because curveballs are going to keep coming at you, but you can control your destiny when you get to make the decisions. So
awesome.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And as we wrap up, what are some of the other things you're working on right now in terms of Optometry CEO and Partners in Profit? What do you have going on?
The biggest thing that I learned is as I sat down at the table with PE and as I was presented to run PE in various avenue, I decided that I wanted my autonomy, number one, and number two, why can't we run a large conglomerate and remain individual? So act big, but we can remain independent. And so with that, I came out and ended up going deep and not wide in a GPO, which is a group purchasing organization that allows us as members to get together and to work together in negotiating and to finding profitable means to continue to move forward. And so our group, Partners in Profit, is focusing right now on frames and ophthalmic lenses. And we've created a system that we come in, bring companies in and outfit the board on frame models. So that means that you pull all the cash flow. So when I did this, I pulled about $200,000 to $225,000 of cash flow out of my frame inventory. Evan, you know that that's a big deal. My CFO was just like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? Because it's costly to keep inventory. So then we've partnered with a ophthalmic lab, and we have a system to where we're extremely profitable. So we're bringing members' cost of goods down in the 20% range. And if you've seen a lot of optometry P&Ls, you know that that's a healthy business. And so we're able to do that, and we're doing that with our members. So it's called Partners in Profit. We're by invitation only, but we have been working with independent practices to continue to create sustainability and show that there's hope and there is still profits. So that's what I've been working on. That's the main thing.
Perfect. Where can they find you if they want to learn more about you or follow along?
That's a good question. Why don't you put in the notes my email address? They can just email me directly at chad@pipgpo.com. And if they're interested in finding out more, it doesn't cost them any. I set it up. I structured it in a way that the vendor, we're together in this. We're not compensated. We're not on the vendor's tab. We're not on their payroll, nothing. We're working together as a group. So your cost of membership is basically being vetted out as a practice that's wanting to profit and that you're running it intentionally from the owner. So if you got that email at chad@pipgpo.com, just email me and I would love to.
Perfect. I will put everything
further
in the show notes that you mentioned today and all your contact info. Again, if you have any questions on anything we talked about, either reach out to Chad or myself and we can chat about that. But in the meantime, appreciate your time here and going over everything we talked about today. I think we could have pulled out at least 6 more hours of content out of all of that, but hopefully I'll have you on again and we'll dive into some of the other stuff we mentioned. But in the meantime, I appreciate your time, Chad, and coming on today. I appreciate your time listening today, everybody, and we'll see you on the next episode, and take care.
Want more resources to help master your money? Check out the Education Hub on Evon's website at optometrywealth.com. Evon Mindren is a certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors, a California registered investment advisor. All opinions of Evon and his guests are their own. This show is for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for specific investment, legal, tax, or other decisions. Clients of OWA may own securities mentioned on this show.